lived, in the vicinity of which we lived, and where we went every day at least. Well, not every day, but almost every day. Dublin to me is a James Joyce theme park. Anywhere you go, you walk the streets, you go to a restaurant, you go to a pub, you go shopping. Everybody seems to come right out of Ulysses, and they all seem to be talking about the same topics. And everything that Joyce mentions is still there. The Wellington Monument, Boylan department store on whatever street it is. And living in Dublin to me was like living in the Shire for Tolkien fans, or living in Arkham for H.P. Lovecraft fans. That's one of the things I liked about Los Angeles. I felt I was living in a Raymond Chandler theme park. I'm a big fan of Raymond Chandler.
Do you feel like living in Ireland influenced your writing very heavily?
Yeah, especially, well, Joyce has been a major influence all my life, but I think while I was in Ireland, two of the books I wrote in Ireland are very Swiftian. I've always liked Swift, but I discovered the closest library had almost every damn thing he ever wrote. So I started taking them out one by one and reading all of Jonathan Swift instead of just Gulliver's Travels and The Modest Proposal, which is all most people have ever read. I read the Drapier Letters and The Tale of the Tub, and that one with that wonderful title, Thesis that the Abolition of Christianity would not be in all respects a good thing for England. And all sorts of wonderful stuff. And I can see a very heavy Swift influence on my book, The New Inquisition, which is a satirical attack on fundamentalist materialism, and also my book, Natural Law, which is a Swiftian sort of polemic against people who believe there are natural laws that can be violated. The Pope said that the other day. He said homosexuality is against natural law. I'm willing, like Randy offers $1 million to anybody who can prove psychic abilities to him, which he can't do because he won't let anybody prove it to him. I'm willing to pay $1 million to see anybody do anything against nature. It's anything in violation of the laws of nature. I'm convinced it can't be done. And yet a lot of people say some things are against nature. The atom bomb is perfectly natural or it wouldn't work. I don't like it, but it's natural. Bubonic plague is natural or it wouldn't exist. So I wrote Natural Law to beat the hell out of all the people who use natural law as an argument about how we should behave.
How about
they all disagree about what's against natural law. The Pope thinks it's homosexuality. The Ayatollah Khomeini claimed that buggering your brother-in-law was worse than buggering a camel, but buggering a camel wasn't as bad as buggering a weasel or something like that. Well, I don't think he consulted any camels and asked their opinions on that issue, you know.
Did you find that living around the, just in the delightful language of Ireland, seeped into your work at all?
Oh, yeah. Curiously enough, it was while I was living in Ireland I read this poll. I forget where. I guess I must have read it in the Irish Times. Somebody did a poll of the English-speaking world. And it turned out the Irish have the largest average vocabulary of anybody in the English-speaking world. That's larger than the English, the Canadians, the Australians, and us, and whoever else speaks English. And you notice this, the first thing in Ireland. That's because Celtic culture was so largely oral in its great classic pagan days. And then after the English conquest, when Henry VIII went Protestant and they tried to wipe out the Catholic Church in Ireland, to try to abolish it totally, they passed a law that Irish parents could not educate their children. They wanted to make them all illiterate. Muhammad the Great used the same tactic when he conquered India. He tried to reduce all the Hindus to illiteracy. And so there was a long period in which the Irish were deliberately starved of education. Then they found out some of the families were sending their children to France to get educated, so they revised the law. It was against the law to educate an Irish child in Ireland or anywhere else. The English really did this. And that contributed a great deal to oral culture, since there wasn't much literacy under those laws, although some did remain. And then there's the fact that nobody has noticed except Anthony Burgess that English in the rest of the English-speaking world has become more and more functional and rational, whereas English in Ireland is ludic, it's playful, it's a game. Hugh Kenner, one of my favorite literary critics, he defines an Irish fact as having the plasticity of a rubber inch. An Irish fact is anything that makes the conversation livelier and inspires somebody to order another pint. Yeah, Kenner went around trying to find out where James Joyce was baptized. He found 3 churches claiming they baptized Joyce. And this is only recently, you know. When you find out there were 7 heads of St. Denis in the Middle Ages, well, what can you expect of the Middle Ages? But this is only in the last century, you know. Joyce was baptized in 1882, right? It's only a little more than a century ago. And, well, he met a guy who claimed to know the original of Blazes Boylan and Ulysses. And when Kenner was eager for more details, he told him, well, Bloom finally did confront him. Bloom's real name was Hunter, and he confronted him right here in this park where we're talking. The Irish have much more faith and imagination than in science, which is a relief for me because my mind tends to be rather scientific, although my critics won't admit that. Let's say my mind is both scientific and playful at the same time.
Do you consider yourself to be simply a writer as such?
Well, I used to call myself a guerrilla ontologist, which is a term I picked up from somebody in the Physics Consciousness Research Group, which I was a member of back in the 70s. This was a bunch of physicists who got together once a week to discuss the philosophical implications of quantum mechanics. And they had a parapsychologist named Barbara Honegger, and I was invited as sort of resident science fiction writer. And somebody used the word guerrilla ontology for what we were doing. I thought it was a good label, so whenever I was interviewed, people asked me, your books are so different. What do you call them? And I said, oh, they're guerrilla ontology. And then I got bored with that after a while, and I found 2 different books in which I was called a postmodernist. And it was really hip to be a postmodernist in the 80s, so I started calling myself a postmodernist. Then I read some more of the postmodernists and found I disagreed with them on almost everything. So now I just call myself a damned old crank. I think that sums it up better than any of my previous titles.
Who are your favorite writers?
Well, James Joyce, Ezra Pound, and even though it's corny, Shakespeare. Shakespeare is an inexhaustible well of treasury of language and fascinating characterizations too. I reread something by Shakespeare at least once a year, and I look at Shakespeare films quite frequently. I have a great respect for Homer, but I think I've read the Odyssey about 5 times, but the last time was about 20 years ago, so I guess Homer is sort of fading into the background finally. Moby Dick I've read 4 times, and the last time was only 2 years ago, so Moby Dick is a stronger influence than Homer, I guess. Dante, in spite of all the praise heaped upon him by people I respect, I've never been able to stand much of Dante. I like Chaucer, but I can't claim to be much of a Chaucerian. Raymond Chandler and H.P. Lovecraft are my 2 favorite of the déclassé writers. They're both considered writers of pulp thrillers, not very intellectual and so on. I think they're wonderful. I love their style. I love the way they tell their stories. To me, there's only one detective story writer, and that's Chandler, and there's only one horror story writer, and that's Lovecraft, and all the rest of them are boring, comparatively speaking.
How did you end up getting classified as a science fiction writer?
I don't know.
Because it doesn't really fit.
Well, that's Fritz Schrodinger's cat.
Yeah, true.
The reviewer in New Scientist, which this is one of the greatest reviews I ever got, he said that Schrödinger